Welcome to ClubCast, the Clubland podcast. I'm Dr. Seth Teville. Last week saw the launch of a major new book on London Clubland. And no, this is not self-promotion. I'm referring to someone else's book entirely. The London Club, Architecture, Interiors, Art. It's a fantastic new 300-page coffee table book looking at Clubland interiors today. Prepared with considerable cooperation from many of the clubs themselves, it's lavishly illustrated with specially commissioned photographs by Laura Hodgson. And I'm very lucky to be joined on ClubCast this week for an exclusive interview with the author, Andrew Jones. Andrew spent 20 years as a partner at Linklaters, travelling the globe on infrastructure and natural resource projects. But in recent years, he's been a travel writer. And he's also, as you'll hear from the interview, a keen devotee of the world of clubs. And I'm delighted to be joined on ClubCast by Andrew Jones, the author of The London Club. Andrew, how did you first come to write this book?
Well, I've always loved Clubland, and I've always felt that the kind of architecture and interiors was slightly neglected in the sense that there are some great monographs on a number of clubs, and there's been lots of narrative about all the other amazingly interesting aspects of clubs, but I just felt there was quite a lot still to be done on the aesthetics of clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And then interestingly, for newer clubs, I mean, a lot of them are very much built on aesthetics. So art and design are kind of often used to kind of distinguish brand new clubs. And some clubs, it's almost, their only distinguishing feature is the aesthetics when they first open, and people are buying into the interiors. But even the new clubs, apart from a kind of the PR around an opening that you might find in, Wallpaper magazine or something, that's also not very documented and also quite ephemeral. So it all made sense to try and tie it all together.
And how does this build on your last book? Because that was on the buildings of Green Park. I think it was a sort of lockdown project originally.
It was very much lockdown project. It was a book that grew out of Instagram posts in which I wrote a little sort of history and description of each building around Green Park, which was where I live. So it was my sort of lockdown neighborhood, which I could walk around. And it's a relatively small book. It was very much conditioned by lockdown in the sense that I did my own photography. The research I could do was relatively limited. I mean, libraries were largely closed, but I found lots of good stuff, but it wasn't as open as now. Um, but it also did have quite a lot of things about clubs, just because I guess Piccadilly is one of the great club thoroughfares of London historically. And then on the other side, on the Green Park side, you've got the Overseas League. So there was already the beginnings of clubs in there. This book is a kind of much more weighty, both literally,
Yes.
two key, but also hopefully in terms of content. So, it's more research. There's a proper, professional photographer doing the photographs. So it is definitely, I guess, a step up in terms of all of that.
And you touched on living in the sort of Green Park area and having done so, I think, for a good 20 years. You're very much steeped in clubs. But what was your introduction to this world? Because the book mentions your father had a club membership as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was brought up in Switzerland, and at the age of 10, I was sent to boarding school, and so my parents would to and fro, and we'd go kind of back to school and things with them, and so forth. And I guess, I mean, there were three places that we would quite, or they would often go to. There'd be the Overseas League, the Sloane Club, and then there was the old Parrot Club in the Basil Street Hotel.
Ha.
Was a sort of, that old ladies' club of a very long time ago in a hotel that doesn't exist anymore.
Mm.
And I think the first time I ever stayed in London was in the Overseas League. And I remember we did 1 or 2 travels in the UK, which must have been through reciprocals. I remember being probably 9 years old and being astonished by this billiards room in Glasgow, which I imagine must have been the Western Club or one of those
Mm.
old clubs in Glasgow. And then when I went to Cambridge, I joined the Pit Club. and there was reciprocity with the Travellers Club, and I joined the Travellers Club. I think there was also reciprocity with the Oxford and Cambridge Club. And then I remember being interested in the art world and someone taking me to lunch at Brooks's and finding that fascinating. So I
Mm.
think one thing led to another, really, sort of build up. So yeah, it was a sort of, I suppose, from a fairly early age, I was sort of aware of them.
And what were your sort of early impressions of these places?
Rather wonderful. I mean, a whole world, a very British world. I mean, I mean, there are a few clubs in Switzerland, but it's not the same tradition. It was a very British world. I think it was I think part of the kind of novelty and almost exoticism of Britain for me coming here as a as a child that had been brought up in overlooking Lake Geneva.
Mm.
Uh, and I think and then I've always I think the sort of coziness and the sort of tribalness and the sort of the non-commercialness of a lot of clubs has always appealed to me from then on.
Mm.
And the contents. I mean, when I first went to Brooks's, I was astonished by by the surroundings, by what was on the walls. I was probably aged about 16 or 17.
And your book very much focuses on club interiors. What can they tell us about the club itself?
Well, I think they can tell us everything and then sometimes nothing. So if you think about the clubs where there's a real history and to that club, and where there's a kind of real reason for that club. The club revolves around a particular activity. I mean, take the Fly Fishers Club. The interiors are all about fishing. Chelsea Arts Club interiors full of pictures by members. Garrick Club all about the theatre. The
Mm.
military clubs full of militaria. And then some clubs you get to really read the history of that club. So if you go to the In and Out Club, there's obviously the military history, um, the kind of main naval and military side, but also some of the smaller clubs like the Goat Club and the ladies,
Mm.
uh, the various ladies club, the ladies Carlson Club and the Cowdrey Club, and then
Mhm.
the Norwegian Den Norsk, and then the Argentine Canning Club. So you sort of go around the club, and it all you can kind of read the history of the club and
Mm.
how it came to be its current thing, and then you get libraries too. I think tell you a lot about clubs.
Mm.
Um, the Savile Library is what they call it, a monument. All letters by members. Obviously, the Garrick Club carries on the theatre collection. The Travellers Club has got amazing travellers accounts.
Mm.
Um, and I think then the other sort of non-club side of it that interiors tell you about is when a club has been adapted as adapted family houses. So take the Savile Club, which is essentially an American billionaire's house, taken over by the Savile in the 20s, and that tells the whole story of the sort of 1880s Americans in London and the kind of French taste they brought in and the French decorators they used. So there's an amazing sort of domestic history that building tells.
Yes, I'm curious about some of these slightly blurred lines about, say, the theme of a club. Because when you have something like you mentioned, a Fly Fishers, that's a very clear theme as to what the library is about, what the artworks are about, and so on. But then you also mentioned earlier something like Brooks's, which doesn't officially have a theme, but it has a very recognisable, understandable culture of its own. And I wonder how much the interiors reflect those sort of informal cultures as clubs have evolved.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, Brooks is, I suppose that the I think the 2 dozen or so images of Charles James Fox set the kind of liberal tone of Brooks's, and that's sort of, and I suppose then you're reminded of the kind of gambling origins. I suppose because some of the rooms were used for that, but the gambling chips everywhere,
Mm.
and then I suppose then you get the sort of more the sort of the better behaved, more cultured modern side of Brooks's in the fact that it has a very big library.
Mm.
So it's sort of that also, you trace the history of the club through its contents, but but that club has morphed from being probably a pretty terrifying gambling place in the 18th century to the kind of rather
Mm.
elegantly restrained place it is now.
And you mentioned libraries. I mean, they're an interesting feature in that they're more rare than people, I think, often realise in Clubland. There are about 15 or so London club libraries, which are very impressive indeed. Places like
Mm.
Brooks's, the Athenaeum, the Travellers. But then there are a lot of clubs which, for example, have a room that's called the library that has about 3 books in it.
I
It's quite rare to actually have a good functioning whole library, and that tells you perhaps something on the.
tells you a lot, doesn't it? It tells you a lot. It tells you, and yes, and there are one or two clubs that it really is just the you know who's who, the Bible, and if you're lucky, and the Oxford English Dictionary
Mm,
as their library, uh, and then other clubs actually quite surprisingly, there are one or two clubs that don't have particular libraries, but they had libraries.
mm,
They well, obviously the National Liberal Club, there was the which you tell the story of so well in your book about the library going to, I think it's now Bristol, isn't it?
that's right.
Um, but then other clubs just flog their libraries for just book by book to raise money,
Mm,
along with the silver, along in those difficult sort of 1960s and 70s and
mm.
80s when clubs were often struggling.
Would you agree with the observation attributed to Churchill that we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us?
Yeah, I think so. I think very much. Uh, I think people's behavior really is fashioned by the sort of built environment in which they are. Um, and I think in terms of older clubs probably do slow people down in a nice way.
Mm,
Um, and sort of, often people want to live up to them. I think some people sort of behave in a slightly curiously old-fashioned way as soon as they go into a club, which they wouldn't necessarily do on their bicycle outside. Um, and then you've got, I think, in modern clubs, you've got some amazing sort of lifestyle
mm,
type clubs like the Soho Houses, where you leave the street in White City or in the Strand, and suddenly you're upstairs and you're in Palm Springs, because there's a wonderful pool and there are deck chairs and there are parasols and there are cocktails and all sorts of other things, and I think that's a really, I find that fascinating, the way I think Soho House in particular has kind of created these sort of, almost in defiance of the British climate, has created
mm.
these kind of tropical paradises. It's amazing.
Yes, I think part of the fascination also of clubs has been the way that they have an atmosphere of their own, only a few meters away from the pavement, and how
Uh,
different that transition can be.
It's astonishing, isn't it? And I suppose the most, the most sort of amazing examples of the bow windows of St James's Street, aren't they? Really, the sort of
Mm.
poodles and whites when you are a few yards away from people's heads reading what it is. It's an amazing transitional thing there.
And your book covers 46 of London's clubs, old and new. How did you come about selecting which ones to include?
Well, I mean, as you know, there are sort of 130 or so, and I think that we were really aiming to show the beauty, the variety, the sort of visual interest of London clubs. So we did very consciously choose clubs that were interesting and varied. And of course, there's a limit to how long the book can be, and we could have done, I suppose, shorter chapters and had less per club and a few more clubs, but we tried to get the balance of between being full about individual clubs, but um, but also kind of selective. Um, and so if you look at the kind of the range of clubs, they're not comprehensive. So you've got a couple of 18th century clubs, a handful of Regency clubs, one or two Victorian clubs, a handful of modern
But it's
clubs.
it's a
So
good selection.
that's nice to hear it from you, who the greatest expert on the subject. I mean, I think it is it was really hard. There were some really hard
Mm,
decisions to make.
sure.
And yeah, I mean, hopefully people get a sense of the variety, and it is a wonderfully varied and sort of textured world, and a kind of a curiously open world in the sense that I think there really is a club for everybody in London. And so there's a working men's club. We included this beautiful Mildmay club.
Mm,
Um, there are clubs, the subscriptions in our book probably go from £30 to about £10,000 a year. Actually, but I mean the main thing is they are beautiful clubs, and they have something really interesting to show for themselves when you walk around.
Do you find that the interiors of clubhouses can be at odds with the exteriors?
Yeah, I think for lots of interesting reasons. I mean, I think some of them are very much driven by history. So the Arts Club in Dover Street has this Georgian facade, which was quite improved actually by Dennis Lennon in the 60s and 70s. But that facade, behind it is a very post-war building because it was so badly bombed in the war.
Mm.
Um, but that really has added to the visual interest of the club. So you have the bits that survive the bombing, the Blitz, the staircase, and one or two of the drawing rooms. But then you have this really interesting transition from those rooms into much more modern rooms at the back, um, uh, and where Dennis Lennon and others did some great work, and then more recently it's been redecorated. So it's quite a surprise when you go in there. I think it's kind of it
Mm.
adds the kind of variety and interest. Um, I think a lot of the kind of contemporary Mayfair clubs, there is no relationship between inside and outside.
Mm.
They're a beautiful townhouse or a beautiful facade, and then there are sort of extravagant interior decoration concept on the inside without a particular relationship between the two. Sometimes they work really well together. I think the sort of Hertford Street kind of marriage of quite sort of intimate cottage scale
Mm.
buildings and small rooms and all the kind of business within those rooms works very well. But sometimes I think it's quite jarring the inside and the outside. Um, and then I think then you get some lovely surprises like you go into the RAF club and you get the Running Horse pub with sort of
Yes.
this really sort of old-fashioned tavern downstairs.
Mm.
Um, or there's the American bar at the East India Club, which is also incredibly sort of Tudor Beethoven on the inside,
Mm.
behind an Italian facade.
Yes,
And then,
you get a lot of that in American clubs as well, don't you?
yeah, it is. I think it is. It's probably an American bar idea. It's a sort of coziness idea, isn't
Mm.
it? And to try and just kind of bring it all down to something more manageable after the grandeur at the front.
Mm. And you seem to very much be suggesting that there's an element of change in these clubs. You've talked about how things like the Arts Club have renovated and changed over time. I mean, how much are clubs fixed and set in stone in their interiors, and how much is that not the case?
Yeah, I think it's quite driven by the kind of the sort of economics of the club and the markets they're in. So um, I think some of the sort of newer, trendier clubs are very, very interior design led, and really appeal to people because of their sort of spectacular interiors and so forth, and also probably feel the need to update themselves more regularly and have the money to do so. I think that the traditional clubs, um, the kind of Pall Mall clubs, the kind of Travellers and the Reform and the Athenaeum, uh, are pretty stable.
Mm.
I mean, they've had big decorative changes, but where they are now, it's still a lot of original furniture. They believe in sort of fixing that furniture rather than replacing it.
Yes.
A lot of the newer clubs, you go to. Um, I'm just thinking, for example, Home House had an amazing Zaha Hadid bar and reception desk, which was this kind of extraordinary sort of twirl of polished steel, which apparently wasn't very good because all the cocktails would slip off it and so forth. So that was replaced in due course, which is a shame. But there are reasons. Or you go to some other clubs and a drawing room becomes a sushi bar, and then Soho House I think refurbishes its houses every 7 or 8 years, and they've got an 80 strong design team doing that.
I mean,
Um,
I'm interested in the idea of how some club interiors may have stood up very well, and how others, some flaws became very apparent very quickly.
yeah,
Have there been a few examples of that?
I mean the ones that stood up well. I mean, obviously the Regency clubs have been particularly successful, and I think some of those clubs like the Travellers are so fit for purpose. It's really extraordinary, and yet and yet they've been through bad times as well. If you look at some of
Mm,
the old pictures
mm,
of clubs, they were all whitewashed. The National Club, all those beautiful multicolored tiles were just sort of painted white or hidden.
mm,
Um, I think, but then you get things like billiards rooms, which in some clubs are quite popular. I think,
mhm,
like the pool table, the Savile, and so forth. But then again, the Liberal Club, looking at the old plans, they had huge rooms full of snooker tables, which have been turned into meeting rooms because that's what people want nowadays, I suppose. I think size is interesting. I mean, and some of the Victorian clubs were built on such a big scale, and a lot of the buildings on Piccadilly, like the Japanese embassy, the Junior Constitutional Club, they were built like sort of ocean liners
mm,
for sort of tens of thousands of members, and that just wasn't sustainable. And so I suppose that building was just not fit for purpose because it just was too big.
mm.
It's interesting. It's interesting how some, I suppose I mentioned the Zaha Hadid slippery bars at home house, that things like that I suppose do do get changed. And they're really, some of these clubs are, the footfall is immense, and so they really are
Mm.
used. And so I suppose they do just need to redecorate because they get so worn out. Some of these clubs are open from 7 a.m. till 3 a.m. It's an amazing
Yes.
non non-stop activity.
And homing in on one aspect of the interiors, how does club furniture differ from other furniture?
Well, I think clubs are one of the are kind of the traditional clubs at least are a really rare repository of beautiful brown furniture of the sort that's become so unfashionable in domestic interiors. And they're incredible things. I mean, beautiful, library furniture and beautiful big armchairs and sofas and all the stuff that um used to be available in antique shops in every town in Britain all over London, that seems to have just disappeared. Actually, it's still being used and looked after and loved in London clubs, and often the
Mm,
best example. Um, and then specifically, you get types of furniture that you don't really get to see elsewhere, at least not nowhere else that I go.
mm.
And things like gout stools,
Yes.
uh, which is and peculiar design gout, so sort of T-shaped gout stools, which are so hard to use, but well, at least I can't use them, but which are with and ballot boxes, which is kind of half furniture, but very much linked to how members are elected, and then things like chaise longue and I think scale as well, kind of enormous sofas like at the Reform
Mm.
Club, for example, which are very much institutional pieces.
And those weighing chairs that a lot of the older clubs seem to have
Playing,
as well, uh,
amazing playing
to
chairs, yeah,
wear
and then
yourself before and after dinner.
so good. I think it's to do with betting too, and some of those have got
Mm.
betting, and then of course then the other amazing aspect of club furniture is the kind of collector's furniture, um, by which I mean the kind of relics of famous members, like in the Garrick, the chair that Henry Irving died in,
Yes.
or Byron's sofa, or the Athenaeum Faraday's wheelchair and Charles Dickens's chair, and so there's a whole um sort of museum side of the furniture, which is really interesting side.
Yes, I'm always fascinated by how clubs embed these bits of history in themselves, and they make it almost a staple of the stock tour that a member will have when they have a guest over, and you want to take a look at a famous chair, for instance. There's Asquith's chair in the corner of the rear library at the Reform Club, for instance.
Yeah, yes, yeah. I mean, great sort of talking points, aren't they? It's
Mm.
almost to help the conversation flow. And I suppose that, I mean, the other thing which I find very interesting is the club table. And yeah, I'm sure you've seen the end papers of.
They're fascinating. I mean, it's worth explaining to our listeners. You've actually set up a diagram illustrating the dimensions and shape of every one of the club tables for the clubs covered in the book.
Yeah, so for a year and a half, I would never visit a club without a tape measure. You know, much to the sort of chagrin and embarrassment of some of the people I was with.
Oh,
And it says a lot about the club, how the table is designed. Some clubs have got
yes.
very specific views as to the exact width. I think the Saddle Club, it's 1066 millimeters is the scientifically approved width of a to allow conversation to cross the table as well as going sideways. The Garrick Club is the length of a Routemaster bust, literally.
Yes.
There is a bust that length, and other clubs actually they're less it's less of a feature, it's less important. So I think it says a lot about them, and and some clubs tolerate or encourage members to read a book over dinner if they want to. Others won't let you, and so that's the other side of it. Do you have single tables alongside these huge tables in the middle? So that was great fun to sort of look at
Mm.
those to see who was doing what.
No, that's absolutely fascinating. And one of the odder features of the book, but actually which I found very enlightening, was the section on club lavatories. Perhaps you might explain to our listeners why those are particularly significant.
Well, I mean, loos are often visiting the loo is often a very memorable moment
Mm.
in the club, and actually, sometimes it's the only time when you can look around at what's on the walls, and often it's spy cartoons or something, because you're not socializing as you would be at a table or in a drawing room, and it's funny how clubs, old and new, have really gone for it when it comes to decoration of the loos. So in some clubs it's like a museum. If you go to the
Mm.
Oriental Club, there's this incredible 18th century oak um, pipe that they found in the basement of their building when they were doing some building works. I mean, a really proper old tree trunk used for
Mm.
used for as a conduit, and then um, and then someone like the beefsteak has actually really designed their look, showing people the kind of amazing members they've had over the years, and so they've papered facsimiles of the various candidates' books and
That's
members,
right.
proposals on the walls, um, and then some clubs are just extraordinary bits of decoration architecture. The City of London Club is this astonishing hybrid between the sort of most amazing Victorian tiled club, a really extraordinary decorative tiles, and these extraordinary cisterns over the urinals, which are kind of glass fronted.
Mm.
Um, and then and that with a sort of extraordinary sort of 60s, 70s overlay of avocado, that sort of peach and avocado sink outside. So you've got this kind of these amazing sort of strong design statements. And then contemporary clubs have made it also a big feature out of them, and there's if you look at sort of the new Annabelle's loos, you know Victoria Beckham
Mm.
did a selfie there, which went on Instagram and got 75,000 likes. And particularly some of the clubs where you're not supposed to take photographs. Actually, if someone takes a photograph somewhere, it's likely to be the loo, and so
Yes.
it's a selfie studio. So loos have got this really extraordinary thing, and then some clubs that the loos have got barbers chairs and shoe shining stuff, and so that's also
Mm.
it's quite sort of intimate part of the club.
You make the point also in the book that they're unusually sociable in that people will have a discreet chat in the loo on the way to or from there.
Yes, there is that too. There really is actually. It's a very it's a sort of moment to relax, isn't it? When your people are at a very formal dinner, and then they sort of go downstairs and
Mm.
have a sort of chat in the loo. It is a funny sort of slightly more relaxed corner of the club.
And were there any surprises when you were researching the book?
Well, I think I was really charmed and surprised by how thoughtful a lot of contemporary clubs are about their art collections.
Mhm.
Um, Soho House, uh, Coco, a lot of the Robin Burley clubs. I mean, there are some really beautiful things on the walls. Soho House has got some really clever and witty themes. I mean, the Ned is is the sort of city version of Soho House, and the same curate worked on that. And there, they realized that 93% of FTSE CEOs were men, and so they decided to do an art collection that was 93% by women, just to kind of invert that. And you go to you go to Soho House in White City, and you've got it's all sort of TV themed and about the Peter Blake pictures of famous TV programs and so forth. House of Cocoa in Camden's got some really good things around the sort of history of music and so forth. So it's really, and then the Robin Burley clubs have got beautiful modern British pictures plus sort of family Oswald Burley things. So that was a really positive surprise that there was real thought and going into that. There were particular discoveries, which I suppose count as surprises, like the Lansdowne Club. I found this really rare and beautiful Alva Alto table, which had come from the kind of original fit out of the Lansdowne as a club in the 30s. In the RAF, I suddenly noticed one or two light switches in the form of propellers from planes, which apparently were everywhere, but there were only one or two left. And I think in some ways, the most lovely surprise. In some ways, it wasn't a surprise. I sort of known it a bit from my own clubs, but was just in the staff of clubs, the sort of knowledge and loyalty and enthusiasm of club staff, which was often equal and sometimes superior to that of the members of the club. So there was this whole other world of club membership and loyalty in the people who worked there, and that was a very lovely thing. I mean, we spent a lot of time in clubs, out of hours or weekends or before members arrived for lunch. So we got to see a lot of different people working there, and just got to experience how much it was their club as well, and that was a lovely thing.
Yes, that's a hidden side to clubs, the behind the scenes staffing aspect when everything's quiet.
Absolutely, and they're real families often.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on ClubCast, Andrew.
Great pleasure to talk to you, Seth.
And you can buy the London Club Architecture Interiors Art either directly from the publisher, ACC Art Books, or from your outlet of choice. If you can physically make it into central London, then good old-fashioned bricks and mortar shops like Hatchard's, Haywood Hill and John Sando are each stocking pre-signed copies. And that's it for this week's Clubcast. For more updates on the world of private members' clubs, ranging from pages from history to the very latest news, don't forget to subscribe at clubland.substack.com. That was Clubland, and you've been listening to HMS Pinafore by the Doyley Cart Company, conducted by Malcolm Sargent.